All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy's Freddy Fazbear reaction video. And it feels like it's a yearly occurrence at this point where there's a couple things we do at a yearly basis. A, update retcons and timelines, things that we've always assumed, always believed, and now it comes out where it's like, yeah, we've been wrong this entire time. And second of all, this question: is FNAF even solvable? That's a question that I would say we've asked ever since probably the first game, because we had the mysteries of the Bite of 87. Newspaper clippings talked about a mysterious incident where 5 kids were lured to a back room and killed by some person, maybe employee, maybe not. And he was arrested because he was caught on camera, but he was never convicted because the bodies were never found. So I would say ever since the very beginning when FNAF 1 came out, the question was, can FNAF even be solved? Right? That's a question that I feel like everyone asks every single year. And I know for a fact I've said this on past streams, so apologies that I'm repeating myself, but I've always lived with the mindset that I do not have a problem with the FNAF lore being impossible or it cannot be solved. Because at the end of the day, that is why FNAF is still popular to this day. Right? It's not the games. Like, believe it or not, FNAF is not popular in the year good old 2025. FNAF is not popular because the games are really good, the games are very popular, or this and that, what have you. Like, no. The reason why FNAF is even talked about still is still because of the lore, the mystery, solving the timeline, figuring out all the answers, right? The new Secret of the Mimic game that's coming out in June in a couple months, we're not thinking about that as a new FNAF game, right? When the trailer came out, what were the questions? What does this mean for the rest of the FNAF timeline? What mysteries does it solve? Is Edwin and Henry the same person? Right? Think about the lore perspective. We no longer look at FNAF as this indie horror game. We look at this game as a mystery bot style of writing where it's like, can it even be solved? And to me, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a problem in FNAF being unsolvable, because at the end of the day, it's what's keeping FNAF popular to this day, is that it is unsolvable. Now, I have my issues with it, of course, when it comes to retcons and things being inconsistent, of course. But at the end of the day, you have to admit, whether you are deep in the FNAF lore and timeline like me, or someone who's very casual, who plays the games or doesn't even play the games, you do have to admit that at one point the games were popular because it was a new indie horror game. It's this new, brand new thing, so it was very unique, very interesting. And nowadays, when we're not getting games as frequently as you used to, the games are popular because of the mystery, right? Why do people still talk about, solving Security Breach, a game that came out in 2021, 4 years ago? It's because that game is so weird, and we're still trying to figure out what is exactly happening. Same thing with FNAF 4, a game that was made in 2015. We still are trying to solve it and still trying to make sense of what FNAF 4 is all about. A game that came out, once again, a decade ago. So, to me, I don't see a problem with it, but I will, I'll hear you out. I'll see what's going on with him. But to me, yeah, I've said this on past stream, I'll say it again. I don't have a problem with FNAF being unsolvable, because at the end of the day, that's what's carrying the popularity, is the unsolvability, the communication, the discourse when it comes to the FNAF lore. That's what's keeping it popular. Because I feel like if the FNAF lore was solved, indeed, Scott Cawthon came out and said, this is the FNAF lore, this is the story, this is canon, this is event A, B, C, D, E, and a full timeline, right? No amount of discussion, anything. Scott just comes out and says, all right, here's the thing. FNAF 1 was this. FNAF 2 was this. 3, 4, 5, Sis location. FNAF 6, Custom Night. FNAF World. VR Help 1 and 1 and 2. Security Breach. Ruin. Secret of the Mimic. And then future games, Into the Pit. As well as other games as well, right? If Scott went down the line of like, this is the story, here, and explained everything, That'll be great. I think it'll be very interesting to hear what the answers have always been from the creator's mouth. But at the end of the day, once those answers are solved, within a week at best, FNAF is no longer talked about. FNAF is no longer popular. Like, yeah, for that week when Scott Cawthon comes out and says, yeah, this is the whole story, just here you go. Like, yeah, that first week, people will talk about it a lot because it'll be this big revelation. But after that, who cares about future FNAF games? Who cares about future FNAF products? Nobody talks about FNAF lore anymore, the mystery, because, well, it's been solved. So there's nothing else to talk about. So, yeah, I never had a problem with it, but once again, enough introduction out the way.
Right away, no, this isn't a cry for help. I'm not saying the FNAF lore is unsolvable because I've hit a wall or I'm giving up or anything like that. But I think as someone who regularly claims to have solved the FNAF lore and whose main job has been trying to do that for the past 3 years, I'm uniquely qualified to make the claim that the FNAF lore is indeed unsolvable. But like I mentioned in this title, that's not a slash at the quality of the FNAF lore. This isn't a dig at Five Nights at Freddy's at all. Far from it, actually, because I believe the unsolvability of the lore is one of its biggest strengths. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Also, I'm gonna...
Not to repeat myself, but that is literally what I said in the introduction of how the FNAF lore being this big mystery bot style of we have no idea what's going on. They throw it as much detail as possible to get the gears turning, but not enough to like just give us the outright answer. That's why FNAF is popular, because of the mystery. So once again, not to repeat myself again, but brief cliff notes of what I just said.
Try to mellow out this episode. Let me know if you prefer this style or the more energetic hyper style that I kind of leaned into. First things first, we have to narrow down the difference between lore and story, because they are two different things. At least, I'll be using them in two very different ways throughout this video. Every game has a story. Yes, every single one, through the creation of them, even all the way back to Pong. Pong, this game, has a story intrinsically in the gameplay. It's a competitive game. The story of the game is you are trying to beat someone else, and whoever has the most points by the end of the game is the winner. The story of Pong is that of competition with a winner and a loser. It's intrinsic to gameplay. Of course, most games, especially modern games, have more complex and convoluted stories than that, telling the player who they are, where they need to go, and the context of the story going on. But this isn't lore, this is story. For the purposes of today's video, lore is a separate category, and while a majority of video games have lore, whereas story is intrinsically linked to gameplay, lore isn't, so some games can completely forego lore. Pong obviously being one of them. Lore is the world, the settings in which a story takes place. In a way, it's story that's unnecessary to the main game. Story that isn't intrinsic to the actions you're taking. Lore is the story that informs the world around you, and maybe the player yourself. You can fully play a game without interacting with the lore at all, and you wouldn't be lost. Maybe wanting to know more, but you wouldn't be confused. Whereas if you tried to play a game without its story, you would just be pushing buttons to see what happened. Now,
I think that whole thing about story versus lore, first of all, people do use those words interchangeably, especially when it comes to FNAF, where it's like, the story is this, the lore is this, the story is unsolved, the story is impossible. The lore is impossible. What is the lore of FNAF? Right? So, yeah, people definitely use the words interchangeably, but my mind really goes to another word differentiator when it comes to this series, is the whole canonicity and continuity, right? And this is very important when it comes to the books especially, but this whole idea of what is canon and what's a continuity, right? And that basically that comes down to the question of what are the books? Are the books canon? Are the books more canon than the games? Are they as canon? Are they less canon? Is it all taking place in a separate universe? Like, what are the books? And once again, not to repeat myself again, but we've done previous reactions on this, is what are the FNAF books? Are they canon? And I've always lived the mindset that it's all in its own canonicity. Like, the books are canon just as the games are, but it may not exist in its own continuity. Now, that may sound confusing, so let's break it down, shall we? Because, let's be honest, if it's a FNAF video, that's really what we do, is breaking stuff down. But canonicity is this big umbrella of everything under it is canon. It's under the story umbrella under this universe. In this case, Five Nights at Freddy's. The continuity is it taking place in its own same universe or different universe. Like, for instance, I would deem Into the Pit in the same continuity as the overall FNAF timeline, since we first heard about it in books and everything, and now we got a game based off it that's pretty much a one-to-one retelling of the book. And now that Into the Pit is canon, I'll consider its own continuity. Same thing with characters as well. William Afton, we met him in the books. William Afton was revealed to be the purple guy in the books before the games even happened, in the same canonicity. Same thing with Henry, Charlie, Charlotte, who goes on to become the puppet, right? All these other characters, Cassidy, that are very popular staple names in the FNAF universe, where their identity is revealed in the books and everything, and now they are canon to the overall story. But that doesn't mean every single detail, everything in the books is canon. And that's where you get to the continuity question. Because there's a handful of things in the books that's like, is this canon? Is this how the games are? Because that'll be very, very weird, right? Like, brief top of my head of stuff that is in the books, is there Phasgoo, right? Because technically, that's a thing that happens in the books. We have not seen Phasgoo in any of the games. So, does that mean Phasgoo is canon? Does that mean it's not canon? Does that mean it's in its own separate continuity? Like, what is it? What is Phasgoo? Same thing with Bonnie C. Guppies, right? Like, what are those things in the game and everything? Are they canon? Are they not canon? It's very confusing. And to me, I would define that as its own separate continuity, where it exists in the FNAF umbrella in the FNAF universe, but it may not be canon where it exists in the games and changes the lore, right? But it can still be under the Five Nights at Freddy's umbrella. Same thing with another example. The Lonely Freddy storyline, where there's a mini Freddy plushie that is in a back room in a closet, and its whole purpose is to lure and talk to lonely kids who don't have friends. They have a birthday and they're alone and everything. And this lonely Freddy plushie in the back room in a closet is supposed to lure those lonely kids that have nobody into his back room, get them to trust them, and then eventually mind swap and take over the body. Now, has that happened in the FNAF games at all? No, absolutely not. Right? Is it something that is canon, part of the story? Maybe, but who knows? It's just one of those things where it takes place in the FNAF universe. It may not mean that it's fully canon. Right? That's just my viewpoint. In the whole story versus lore argument, it pretty much to me is a one-to-one comparison of the canonicity and continuity of FNAF. Are the books canon or not? And my mindset has always been, if it happens in a book, especially introduces in a book, that's interesting. It's an interesting idea. I put a pin in it, being like, okay, this is interesting. Is this something that also shows up in games or not? If it doesn't happen in the games as well, then I'm like, okay, this is a unique idea, just exclusively tied to the pages, and I just keep it at that. But if it shows up in games as well, then I'm like, okay, I think we have something. I think now we can get into this whole point of like, this is canon to the universe now, right? To me, everything in books is its own separate continuity universe, right? Like, games here, books here, right? Own separate things. But when books tell you something or share something that is like, huh, it also shows up in a game, now we get to a point of, is this canon? But to me, I always view it as separate continuities. They both exist under the Freddy Fazbear universe and name, but games and books are separate unless details merge. That's how I've always viewed it, right? But I know that's been a hot topic forever. Ever since the original trilogy of books in 2015, when we had the break from FNAF 4 and its location, are the books canon? And people have their own mindset. People say that the books are entirely canon, not canon, more canon than the books. This is just my mindset that I've always ran with ever since the very beginning. Not saying I'm smarter than everyone else. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is this is the mindset that I've always operated. Is own separate universes continuities, but if the details merge, then we have something of like, okay, this is now canon.
Most games have story and lore to some extent, one of my favorites being Hollow Knight. The basic story is that you are this bug, the Knight, and for whatever reason, you're drawn to this subterranean kingdom to rid it of its infestation of this orange gas, and along the way you find yourself drawn to defeating the Radiants, something that seems to be the cause of this infection. Along the way you meet several NPCs and enemies that enrich the story you're unfolding, but you're never quite sure what's really going on, and you don't need to. As the Knight, all you need to know is where to swing your sword, or nail. However, Hollow Knight does have a very deep and storied lore to it, something that is honestly hard to find in-game and easy to miss. Honestly, I highly recommend watching YouTube channels like Mossbag to learn more about the Hollow Knight lore, but it's lore that you can fully enjoy the game without ever knowing, whereas the story you just find out by playing the game. Typically, when a video game has a story and lore, there's two main categories that it tends to fall into. Either the story will be very complex and intricate, and the lore will be sort of bare bones just to cover the world building, or the story and lore will be similarly complex and convoluted. An example...
Chat, what do you think? Oh, there's two options. Oh, sorry, my camera's a little blocking it. Should I move the camera for this video? Because I always try to move the camera differently for these reactions just to switch it up, instead of having the same angle every single time. So we're going to go with this angle for today. Why not? But chat, of those two options, what do you think FNAF is? Option 1 or option 2? Complex story, basic lore, or complex story and complex lore? Just wild guess. What do you think it is? Is it basic or is it complex? Let me know your thoughts. Me personally, I have my thoughts and revelations of what I think, right? Of what it is, whether it's complex or basic. So let me know your thoughts.
Of the former is Celeste, one of my favorite platformers. The lore of Celeste is fairly bare bones. It is primarily just the mountain Celeste, something that many climbers have tried and many climbers have failed. And that's all that there needs to be, because the real story and depth of Celeste is in its characters, the ones you play as and the ones you meet, all of them having interesting and fleshed out character arcs that develop over the course of the game. You, the player character, have an intense and dramatic character arc throughout the entire ascent that feels amazing to play through. It's a beautiful game with a beautiful story and just enough lore to make the world building make sense. The other category of games can be seen very clearly in something like Skyrim. The story of Skyrim is complex and vast. There are hundreds of quests that you can do that form and break relationships, all while attaining one key goal in the back of your mind.
Chat, I've never played Skyrim. Does that make me a horrible person? Let me know. I know my school childhood friends growing up, they played Skyrim a ton, and I just never got exposed to it. I never got interested in it. So does it make me a horrible person? I hope not.
It's an insanely long and diverse game to complete, but equally, if not more complex than the story, is the lore of Skyrim, as part of the Elder Scrolls series. The world of Tamriel is vast and storied and historic and filled throughout various previous games in the franchise, but even just focusing on Skyrim, the world building here is insane. The architecture, the people that you don't need to meet, the people you hear about. There is enough side literature that's just found lying around the game that Brian David Gilbert made an entire Unraveled video just talking about those books. None of them needed to be there. You're not really missing anything if you don't pick a single one up, but that is deep and complex lore. It's a game whose story and lore are equally vast. So why do I bring this up? That was a lot of not Five Nights at Freddy's. Well, I think one of the biggest strengths of Five Nights at Freddy's is that it fits into neither of these two major categories. Now, I'm not going to say that FNAF is the first game to ever do this, but I think they are genuinely a pioneer for focusing on just the lore and having the story be as bare bones as necessary to convey pieces of that lore. The story of FNAF.
I'll make the argument, FNAF, I don't know if you're bringing this up as well. Blah. I don't know if you're going to bring this up as well, but I would make the argument that FNAF, pioneers of anything, is an indie horror franchise that leaned heavily into the lore side of things. They gave very little story. And also, they got so popular where there's now conglomeration book series based on said mysteries that you teased and set up in your games, right? Because obviously FNAF has several editions of books. Hello Neighbor also has books. Benny the Ink Machine has books. What other books, indie horror games out there? I can't remember. But I know there's a ton of other indie horror games that also have books that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. And that's kind of frustrating. Right? That's kind of frustrating. I can't think of any others. Right. God, why can't I think of anything else? Why can't I think of any other indie horror games that made books besides Benny the Ink Machine, Hello Neighbor, FNAF? Why am I blanking? Chat, I have no idea why I'm blanking. Because yes, FNAF is not the first video game series to have books made on them. Right? They're not. But as far as like the indie horror genre, you can love the FNAF story, you can hate it all you want and everything, but to me, you cannot deny FNAF is popular, and you know, at its peak when it first came out in 2014, you cannot deny that FNAF was not the talk of the internet. And people were so invested in FNAF, even if you never played it, you still probably heard people talk about it, which is crazy. That this whole series is built up by one person, and it was their last-ditch effort at making games at all.
One is incredibly basic. You are a night security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. You're told that the animatronics can get a little quirky at night, and you should protect yourself by keeping them out of the office. It's never intrinsically made clear if they're haunted or just malfunctioning, but you know if they get to you, you'll die. By the end of the game, you learn that your name is Mike Schmidt, and that's really all we get. And that's all you need to know to play that game. That's all the intrinsic story there is. It's reminiscent of older arcade games like Pac-Man, where sure, you're this guy, you eat pellets, and you eat ghosts. That's all you need to know, do your game. But meanwhile, while those arcade games also had similarly lackluster lore, FNAF on the other hand puts all of its eggs into one basket, the lore. It's incredibly complex and hard to parse. Even starting at just FNAF 1, again keeping it focused on this game, there is a lot of lore about what has happened at these restaurants, why these animatronics are attacking us, and why they might be targeting our player.
And if those newspaper clippings are even real.
Not to mention, as the series goes on, with drippings of lore through the multimedia landscape that is Five Nights at Freddy's. Rare Easter eggs that hint towards parts of a story you've never been able to see. Vague and artistic 8-bit scenarios of something you've never heard of but think you can guess where it's going. All of these pointing to some deeper story that isn't directly connected to the game at all, besides the location. If anything, the games of Five Nights at Freddy's are more so formalities to deliver pieces of lore to the player. Events that happen on the side of the main story that we've never been allowed to see. For most of the franchise, these games don't really have a direct story. You're kind of just doing stuff off to the side. So already, FNAF storytelling focuses on lore differently than most games, and I think that's important to establish when talking about its lore. But what about that lore makes it unsolvable? Of course. Am I too boring for you now, Mark? You know what? Fine. If you're not going to sit with me, I'm just going to have to take some extreme measures.
Skip.
And for that evidence to be valuable to you, Cawthon directly, or the ones that were... When talking about the unsolvability of the FNAF lore, it truly depends on which games of the franchise you're talking about. The ones that were made by Scott Cawthon directly, or the ones that were written by him and instead made by Steel Wool. The way I see it, when you solve a mystery, you need evidence. And for that evidence to be valuable to you, you need all of it, and some sort of assurance that it's reliable and truthful evidence.
Which makes the second point right there, reliable evidence, very, very hard to understand. Because ever since VR Help 101, where Hand Unit, Andy Field told about this, elaborate cover-up that a developer paid off by Phasma Entertainment made games to distract us from the truth as a cover-up. Ever since then, everything was called in question of what is real, what isn't. So much so, is the original 4 games part of that elaborate cover-up so they're not real at all? Or are they actually tied to the story? So, it's that second point that, to me, is the most frustrating. Because we can find evidence for, Easter eggs, FNAF games pretty simply. Right? I don't think that's the issue. The issue and why FNAF is so hard to solve is the reliable part. Is what's real, what's not. What is part of a game that we play in the real world, right? And then what is actually game tied to story and everything. Like, example. If we take it at a very, very basic level, the common theory out there is, us going to the FNAF location in 1993, us going to the location in 1987 in FNAF 2, 20 or 30 years after the original location is FNAF 3. Like, those times that we, as the player, go in and play those 5 nights as we know and love, does not mean that the location was open in that time. Right? Like, we could be playing the FNAF 1 location in 1993, when I brought up the Chuck E. Cheese incident in 1993. And you also tied to the paycheck hours for a minimum wage. But we may be playing 1993, but Fazbear could have been shut down. That location could have been shut down in, the 70s. Right? That could be a thing. And that's what makes it so difficult, where it's like, yeah, the paycheck says 1987 FNAF 2, but that doesn't mean the location is necessarily open in 1987. So that's where you get to the reliability part, where it's like, what is true, what's not. And how even the FNAF 1 movie, and I'm sure FNAF 2 will also do the same thing, the FNAF 2 movie, does the same thing, where Josh Hutcherson, Michael Afton, he goes to that Fazbear location to be the night security guard, and the place is run down and has locks everywhere. It's a wreck, right? Which kind of points to the point of what people have always thought, that, I don't know if that's confirmation or not, since Scott was tied to the production of that movie and everything, but I don't know if that's confirmation, but it kind of leads to the point of yeah, the time that we as the player play these games in the years that we play them does not necessarily mean, from a timeline perspective, that is when those locations were active. Same can be said for Sister Location, because we know Sister Location takes place in that underground bunker under the FNAF 4 house. But we know Sister Location is not that bunker, what we see. Sister Location is tied to the Sugar's Babies Pizza World center, place, palace event. And it was open for one day, had a gas leak incident, and it was shut down, and those fun animatronics were put down in the bunker, and that's what we see in this location, right? So ever since FNAF VR Help 101, where Hand Unit said that a developer was paid off by Fazbear Entertainment as a cover-up to make games to distract us from the original story, that second part, reliable evidence, that is what's so frustrating. That is why, to me, the timeline is so frustrating. And you cannot solve it. Is that second part, is the reliable part. There's a ton of evidence we have, but there's contradictions. And what is reliable, what's not. Like, brief example of something that we know happens, but we don't know is reliable. And I've talked about this, once again, in past videos. So once again, apologies for apologizing, as always. But since we're talking about stuff that is reliable, not reliable, and what makes the timeline so frustrating is this. Who's the first death? Right? Who is the first death in the series? Because, to my knowledge, there's multiple characters that can be first. There is Chica, Susie being first, because their character has death lines that say they were the first. I'm the one who's seen everything. You have Elizabeth Afton getting scooped by a baby, and that explains why in the FNAF 4 house, the girl's room is empty. It explains why Fredbear has that stomach mouth, and that's what the Crying Child would see. Or the Crying Child is also early on in the timeline when it comes to early deaths and everything. So, multiple characters all have evidence to where they can be first. And it's frustrating because they all have a case to be first, but if this person is first, then it throws this wrench in the equation, because then that doesn't make any sense then. Right? Like, example. If Susie is first, right? Susie is first. If Susie's the first death, and we know Susie dies because William Afton, in a screen-like Golden Bonnie suit, lures Susie away and says, "Your dog's not really dead. Here, let me show you that your dog's not dead." And then, obviously, that's when William Afton kills her, right? So if that's what happened, then what about Charlie Charlotte, who was left outside a pizzeria, and William Afton drives by in a purple car, they kill them, right? Very clearly, that's early in the timeline, because that sets in motion everything, because Charlie Charlotte goes on to possess the puppet, so we know that has to be early. But Susie was also the first. So how does that make any sense? And you get into baby killing Elizabeth Afton, Crying Child's sister, which we believe is early, because once again, that explains why the girl's bedroom in the FNAF 4 house is empty, and that explains the stomach mouth of Fredbear is a stomach mouth. That's how the Crying Child would see that event. But then it begs the question of why then? Because we know Baby and the Fun Time Trunks were made to lure and capture kids. Right? That was the purpose of them. So, if that is the first event in the series, Baby killing Elizabeth Afton, William Afton's daughter, then why? Why would you make animatronics that were made to lure and capture kids if that's supposed to be the first event in the series? That doesn't make any sense. To me, something has to happen before, so then we lead up to the Fun Time animatronics being made, and they are made with the purpose of luring and capturing kids, right? Something has to happen prior to that to then lead to the Fun Time animatronics being made. That's how just basic storytelling, that just makes sense. right? So you have Susie possibly being first based on Duff lines. You have Elizabeth Acton being first because that explains why the FNAF 4 bedroom is empty, right? And then you also have Charlie Charlotte the puppet, who we know the puppet is very important to the lore and timeline because they're the one who puts the kids' bodies in the suits that go on to possess them. So we know the puppet's important. And it's also the first and only time where William Afton kills someone outside a pizzeria. All the other deaths are inside a pizzeria, which leads you to believe that that's first. And plus, if we are throwing out even more evidence why Charlie Charlotte is the first, is Henry in the insane ending in his speech. He talks about a wound first inflicted on me. We know Charlie Charlotte is Henry's daughter. So saying a wound first inflicted on me, then let's spread others, that's quite explicit that the puppet Charlie Charlotte is first. Then why does Chica Susie have death lines and customers saying I was the first? If Henry is also saying a wound first inflicted on me, that's where he gets the reliable evidence of what's reliable, what's not. Do we trust Henry's speech, the insane speech in FNAF 6, a wound first inflicted on me and I let spread others? Or do we trust the custom bite line where I was first, I'm the one who's seen everything? They both can't be first, right? They both conflict. AKA, that's why FNAF is so frustrating, because that second point, the reliable evidence. What's reliable, what's not? And it's gotten to a point where I myself, when it comes to lore and answering what is the FNAF story and everything, I've pretty much ignored the FNAF 1, 2, 3 tapes for the most part. Because to me, I just see it as a game mechanic. Like, sure, there's some Easter eggs and details you get from Phone Guy, but overall, it seems like Phone Guy contradicts everything he says. If you gather all the phone tapes from every single night in the series and everything, you combine them, you're like, wait, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, for instance, in FNAF 3, talking about a spring lock failure at a sister location, right? And that's what causes the spring locks to be decommissioned and too dangerous to be worn and everything. It's like, well, then what does that mean then? Is that a one incident? Because we know in Fred Bear's Family Diner, there's two spring lock suits. A spring lock Golden Freddy and a spring lock Golden Bonnie. Right. And that spring lock incident either means both those suits had a spring lock incident, right? And that's what caused them to get shut down. Or multiple Fazbear locations were open at the same time, and they both used spring lock suits, and they both simultaneously had an issue that caused them to be too dangerous to be worn. Right? Which is it? Also, just brief mention as well, but I feel like I should call it out now since we're talking about it, that I've dismissed the FNAF tapes. It's literally got a record that the FNAF tapes are pre-recorded, right? And us listening to them is not the same time frame that we would be listening to it, right? Like when they bring up investigations going on or places shut down because of, kids going missing, we're listening to those tapes that happened, months and months and years before we as the player go to the location. So, aka unreliable.
So in this definition, things can be unsolvable if you either don't have all the evidence, or the evidence you have is unreliable. The Scott Games era of FNAF leans into the unreliability. And I'm not even talking about Help Wanted yet. I know that game introduced the idea that FNAF 1 through 6, at the least, are in-universe games made by an unreliable narrator, Steve Snodgrass. Now, to be fair, Help Wanted establishes that those games are replicas of real-life events, but because they are creations, technically everything within them is unreliable. But putting that aside for a moment, the information...
To me, that's what makes it frustrating, is, hold on, can I pull it up? Yeah, here we go. If I pull up this text, and mind you, this is the first time that this was complete twist on its head, talk about a unreliable narrator paid up by Fazbear Entertainment. So if I pull up this text, goodbye ads. I have an ad blocker. I don't know why I'm seeing ads, but whatever. Okay. So this is the speech that Andy Field Hand Unit says when you're on the roller coaster ride, when you first boot up the VR Help Wanted 1 game. So, welcome to the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience. Fazbear Entertainment is excited to join the digital age, and what better way to do that than with an edge-of-your-seat virtual reality experience? Because we know the VR game is not only VR for us in the real world, but VR Help 1 is also a VR game in-universe. Right? Confusing? Probably. We know that Fazbear Entertainment has developed something of a bad reputation over the last few decades, and while true that some of the stories associated with the name are loosely based on actual events, the majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic. Lawsuits pending. That's where you get a picture of Scott Cawthon, which is amazing. That's why we recreated many of these completely fictitious scenarios that you've been fed over the last several years, in hopes that we can finally move past these childish ghost stories and develop a new relationship with you. Right. So, very clearly, the majority of the stories we've been told, as you said, were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic, aka the rogue indie game developer who was paid off by Fazbear Entertainment to make games for us to lure us away from the truth as a cover-up. Some of it is loosely based on actual events, but the majority of it is false. And that's very weird, just based on the language and everything, because it's like, okay, then what's real and what's not? You're not saying it's all false or all true. You're just saying most of it is false. Okay, so some of that did happen. Some of this FNAF mystery lore of William Afton being a co-creator, co-inventor, creating animatronics, luring 5 kids to a back room, killing them, absorb remnant, want to test their immortality. Like, some of that is real, but we don't know what. And that's what, once again, what makes the inconsistencies of FNAF so frustrating.
In these early FNAF games was already unreliable. We never get direct names of characters, direct notes of what happens, security footage, anything like that at all. The closest we get is one-off first and last names throughout the series, pieces of subtext that is hidden in minigames, newspaper clippings that mention rumors of something happening but nothing directly, and as mentioned before, death minigames whose pixel art is ambiguous at best. Combine that with the multimedia nature of the lore and its several continuities.
Hashtag pink guy.
the vast, overwhelming majority of information we have on William Afton and Henry Emily, the two most important characters in this storyline, come from a series of books that have been confirmed to not take place within the timeline of the games.
They have? Wait. Not took place in the same timeline. Wait. Let me replay that again. Hold up.
Two most important characters in this storyline come from a series of books that have been confirmed to not take place within the timeline of the game.
Within the timeline of the game. Huh. This original trilogy of books is so frustrating for many reasons. Because details are slightly different, and that's what makes it frustrating. Like, for instance, in the Silver Eyes, when it is revealed that William Afton is the purple guy, that's the first time a name has been mentioned, especially someone as important as Purple Guy. It was revealed in Silver Eyes that his name was William Afton. And I bring that up because in the Silver Eyes, when he is revealed to be William Afton, the Purple Guy, it comes out that his first victim was Henry's son, Sammy, or Sam. I think it's Sammy. Right? Obviously, in the games, that's been changed where it's not his son, Sammy, it's now his daughter, Charlotte. Right? The overall story is the same where William Afton's victim is Henry's child, but the name and gender are now switched. So the overall message is the same. It's little subtle details that are no longer the same. And the fourth closet, not just in the timeline, then that's weird. Right? That's really weird. Because there's a ton of details in the fourth closet that happen that's like too oddly specific. Like, for instance, in the fourth closet, that's when we get the secret glowing mushroom waterfall under a pizzeria. Right? Where do we see a waterfall with glowing mushrooms? Oh yeah, it's at the end of Ruin, right before we meet the Mimic. And what is also revealed in the books to be beside that waterfall with the glowing mushrooms is animatronics related to the circus. I think the book even calls out like a lion, elephant, and a bird. And we know from hacking in the game of Ruin, we know those animatronics to exist. And we also see those same animatronics in the trailer for The Secret of the Mimic. So, not existing in the same timeline, even though there's a lot of details that we've gotten from the books that we've pieced together as canon for the lore. Because why else would they exist then? Right? Because Henry hasn't appeared in the games at all, which to me is frustrating. That we've never got a Henry appearance yet. And William Afton's name was revealed in the books before Sister Location came out. Huh. And also Sound Illusion Disc was also a thing in the books, in the Twisted ones. And there's countless examples of people pointing to, this is a Sound Illusion Disc, this is a Sound Illusion Disc. The circular disc power module that we're told in Funtime Freddy is a Sound Illusion Disc. Vanny in Security Breach is holding a Sound Illusion Disc, and that's why your vision impairs, and that's why you hear a high-pitched whirring whenever Vanny appears in Security Breach.
And at the same time, they are the sources of some of the most crucial information for some of the most important characters in this series. Looking at the first 7 games, You can make assumptions, and you can make educated guesses, but you really can't ever truly claim to have guaranteed to have solved a piece of that lore. It's all too ambiguous.
AKA clickbait, which, damn it! So I can't, well, maybe I still will. When it goes up on YouTube, I don't know what I would title this video, but I guess from now on, we can't say, I have solved FNAF. I've solved the lore. This detail that's been hidden for 10 years, I've now solved it. And I can't have, that means I also can't have red arrows and circles all over the thumbnail to get you to click on it. Damn it all!
But that's just the Scott Games era. The current story of FNAF being made by Stu Wool has both of these issues. Starting with the new one, we don't have all the information yet. To solve a mystery, you need all the available evidence in front of you. And the current story arc of Five Nights at Freddy's is about halfway through, it feels like. We don't have all the information, and we likely won't for a long time. Think about the original series of Five Nights at Freddy's, those first 7 games.
I think it depends. Well, maybe it's just a very big nitpick on my end, but I think my question is, when it comes to Steel Wool making these FNAF games now being, the developers, my question to Steel Wool, if I could ask Steel Wool anything, is where is this all leading to? What is the end goal? Right? What is the end goal? Right? You have Help Wanted 1 and 2. You have Security Breach. You have Ruin. You have Secret of the Mimic. Right? Where is the end goal? Where is this all leading to? Right? Where's the ending? Right? I would say that's my question, because I don't want to... I bring that up because I don't want to turn this into like an MCU situation where they're telling story after story after story after story, and nothing feels connected. You're told that it's connected, right? But nothing feels connected at all. Everything feels like its own separate thing. And it's confusing as the viewer to be like, okay, well, where is this going? Where is the end goal? Right? That's why the Infinity Saga in the MCU was so good, because you had set checkpoints of it's leading to this, leading to this, leading to this. And you felt invested in the journey because you knew where things were going to end up. And that's why this multiverse saga of the MCU has been so confusing. Right? Like, the MCU started with original Iron Man. And there was a tease that the Avengers were going to assemble. That was the goal. Iron Man entered the MCU. The MCU was created in 2008. The goal is the Avengers. They're going to that point. So, alright. So the Avengers gets released. There's a post-credit scene of Thanos. Right? Now, does that mean Marvel knew what they were going to do with Thanos and how to introduce him, or what was going to happen 20 years later? No, they didn't. Because, you want to know how I know this? The screenwriters of the MCU came out and said they didn't know what to do with Thanos, what to do with them as far as the story, until they were writing Infinity War. And Infinity War, I would say, in my opinion, maybe my favorite MCU movie. It's certainly up there. It's hard to beat Guardians 1. But regardless, right? Like, they had a plan together to go from Iron Man 1, Avengers, introduce Thanos, eventually get to Infinity War and Endgame. But they did not have a set concrete plan of, okay, we're going to introduce, Thor Ragnarok. We're going to bring in Wanda and Doctor Strange. We're going to bring in Ant-Man. We're going to bring in Spider-Man from Sony. We're going to bring in Loki's gonna have this redemption arc and everything. Like, they didn't know all the details to get to Infinity War. But when they introduced Thanos in the post-credit scene of Avengers, they knew they were going to have Thanos at some point. That was going to be the next thing to get invested. And that's the next goal. And now it's all about getting to that point. And I bring all that up is because now in the MCU, what is it? Nothing feels connected. Like, nothing feels the same. Like, you're told this is the multiverse, and it's all in this whole, like, Kevin Feige MCU umbrella, but nothing feels connected. Right? It doesn't. Right? You cannot tell me that Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, Thor Love and Thunder, and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. By the way, also in the same MCU phase of Phase 5. You cannot tell me all those movies, and it goes past shows as well, but you cannot tell me those movies do not operate under the same rules in the multiverse. They operate completely differently. Right? You're told about in the Multiverse of Madness from John Krasinski, Reed Richards, of, the dangers of incursions, where if you go to a universe that you don't belong in, that can be very dangerous, and that can eventually lead to universe blowing up and everything. But then, isn't that the whole story of No Way Home? Characters coming from different universes all coming together. Wouldn't that mean the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man universe is gone? The Sony Andrew Garfield universe is now gone? Wouldn't those be incursions? I guess not. Right? I guess not, because Marvel knew how much butt ton of money they would make if they added Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Willem Dafoe, Alfred Molina, all in one movie. So don't worry about it. Just consume Nuts product.
Majority of questions from FNAF 2 didn't have a good answer until FNAF 6. Sure, you can look at Give Gifts, Give Life and sort of assume what's going on, but we had no idea who any of these people were until at least 5 games later. We didn't even have a solid idea of who the protagonist of FNAF 1 is until Sister Location, the 5th mainline game. And even still, the fact that Mike Schmidt is an alias for Michael Afton is speculation at best. So when we look at the massive amount of information in Security Breach and Help Wanted, while much of it can be pieced together to make some sort of sense, I strongly believe that the majority of it isn't even meant to be solved yet. It's information that we can't act upon because we don't have the answers to it, and answers we've never thought to ask the questions for. I'm almost certain the Nightmare Own plushes is one of those answers. We have a lot of theories on it. FNAF has several theories on what they might mean. I'm starting to think that they might just be a reference to Help Wanted because it's a VR game, and in the current era, Nightmare Own is seen by the public as a creation for the VR games. But both
Right, it's a video game character. It's not an actual... Nightmare Own doesn't actually exist in the FNAF universe. Like, you're not... let's say you're in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, you're some kid, and you're not seeing some Nightmare Own tangle of wires inside your closet. Like, no, it's a video game character from the VR game.
my interpretation and FNAF's theories on it are just speculation. Because, to be honest, I think it's a question we haven't thought to ask yet, something that we'll learn within the next couple games to ask. And like I mentioned, there's still a reliability issue on top of all of this.
I don't know if we'll ever get that answer. That is one of the things that is, once again, so oddly specific in FNAF Ruin, is they have Nightmare Own plushies all throughout the game, and they also have Circus Baby and Scrap Baby plushies throughout the game as well. And not only that, but the Circus Baby plushies have blue eyes, and the Scrap Baby one have green eyes. Obviously, we know that is a reference to Elizabeth Afton, where Baby, the animatronic, has blue eyes. Baby only gets green eyes after they kill Elizabeth, because Elizabeth had green eyes, which would mean the possession, right? But why is there Nightmare Own plushies in the Pizza Plets? Why are there Baby plushies, right? Why? Like, that's still a question that we have no idea. And to my knowledge, the best answer we could think of for the Nightmare Own plushies is that's a reference to Charlie Charlotte the puppet, right? Because we know Nightmare Own is the reverse emo version of the puppet. And there's a ton of puppet imagery And the Pizza Putz main one you think of is the tangle of power line wires in the arcade on the ceiling. They have a black and white stripe pattern, which is very reminiscent of the puppet. And that's why people like me believe that the Pizza Putz may or may not be some poltergeist infected by Charlie Charlotte the puppet. That's why you see a ton of puppet imagery. But to me, that is a question that we will never get an answer to. We will never know why. I don't think Still will ever come out and say why there is Nightmare on plushies in the Pizza Putz. Same thing with Baby. I don't think we'll ever get an answer. It will just be one of those things where it's like, that's a thing that happened. Who knows why that is, right? It's the same thing in FNAF 4 where what did the crying child see, right? You're constantly told time and time and time again, remember what you saw, remember what you saw, you know what will happen if he catches you. And we still to this day don't know what he saw. And that game came out a decade ago. We're still to this day trying to figure out why that is and what they saw.
Wanted 1 is literally an in-universe VR game, so everything in it is up to suspect. After Cassie puts on the mask in Ruin, she receives an optical nerve chip or something, which distorts her vision. So,
a occipital nerve chip, and it's tied to the Vanny network, the Virtual Augmented Neural Network Integration.
Everything from then on out is technically up to suspect. We're not sure what she's really seeing. If Gregory truly was GGY,
Not sure what she's seen. I mean, I feel like it's pretty clear what she's seeing. Is, once again, the occipital nerve is the Vanny network. And we know the Vanny network is tied to the AR world. So, what do you mean not sure what we're seeing? I feel like it's pretty clear, cut and dry, that what she's seeing is the AR network because of the Vanny network, right? Like, that's why throughout the whole game of Ruin is you see a bunch of stuff that's not really real. You are able to run through and glitch through walls or glitch through computer screens, right? And you're slowly losing yourself into the Vanny network.
and working for Glitchtrap before Security Breach, he would have also worn that mask and received that chip, which in turn means everything we see in Security Breach is technically up to suspect if that chip is involved. Even Help Wanted 2, we start the game wearing the Vanny mask, meaning we already have gotten that chip in our minds. And Steelwool isn't being subtle about this. The entire point of Help Wanted 2 is that nothing is as it seems. So in an environment where we can't trust anything we're seeing, all the evidence we have, which is only a fraction of all the evidence that will eventually be available, is unreliable. So, nearing the end of this rant, I hear you. This doesn't sound like a good thing. So far, this sounds like I've been complaining the entire time. If the focus of the games is the lore and not the story, and this lore is so unreliable and piecemeal, why is that something so many people are drawn to? And why have other games attempted it and failed miserably?
Why have other people failed? Why have other games failed? I've always lived the mindset that it's the completionist principle, right? I've always lived the mindset that's why the FNAF lore is so popular and so addicting, like myself, to try to solve, is the completionist principle. Is you are given just enough details, bare bones details, right, to try to solve it. Like in FNAF 1, you are told of this mysterious Bite of 87. You're at a haunted pizzeria that's very reminiscent of Chuck E. Cheese. These animatronics are haunted trying to get you, right? It's very, very, very simple to understand. But then, you dive into details, there's a ghostly Golden Freddy that appears with "It's me," and if that appears, your game crashes. But then there's also the newspaper clippings that references an incident where someone lured 5 kids to a back room, killed them, was arrested but was never convicted because the kids' bodies were never found, so they were able to walk away and everything. Right? And that just clicks in your head like, huh, that's interesting. I want to solve it. Right? And you're investing hours and days and weeks and months trying to piece together this lore, trying to find these answers. And it's got to a point where you are so invested, you are doing everything possible to try to look at the story and try to solve it because you invested so much time into it. Because if you don't solve it, it feels like a waste. And that's where we get to completionist principle, because, you know, we as humans psychologically, when we start doing a task, we want to complete it. Right? Like, just end of story. Right? We want to complete it. We cannot start doing a task and put so much time and energy into it, and then midway through, we stop doing it, and then walk away, and then never touch it again. Because constantly in the back of our mind, the task is running through our head more and more and more. Like, we started doing this, we got halfway done in it, but we're not done everything. More and more and more and more. And to me, that's why the FNAF lore is so addicting. Is the completionist principle. We want to get that satisfaction that we completed it. We want the satisfaction that all of our time and energy slaved away in the games, Easter eggs, books, movies, hidden dialogue, everything. We want it to be worth it because we want to be proven right, and we want to be able to say, yes, we completed it. But that will never happen because, like I said, the FNAF lore is popular because it feels unsolvable. Trying to think of any real world examples as well, just to try to paint connection. Right? What else can I think of? What other real world examples can I think of with the completion principle, where you're doing something and you have to see it through to the end. You can't end it midway through because otherwise it feels pointless. All right. Let me think. I mean, not the best example I can think of, but this is the one that's just clicking my top of my head while I wait for someone else to give me an answer or an idea. But completionist principle is, let's say you have a cake, right? And there's one piece of cake left. You see it. You see that one piece of cake left standing out on its own. Do you eat the cake? Or do you just leave it and say, you know what? That one last slice of cake and everything, I'm going to refuse. It's very, 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 very hard to resist, right? And the entire time you're like, I need to complete it. I need to finish it and everything. I need to finish it. But you walk away from it and you're like, why? Why did I do that? And I'm living with regret that I didn't finish it. God damn it all. Right? Or I guess another example of, you know, this concept is, let's say you are doing an Elden Ring boss fight and you are doing attempts after attempts after attempts. 50 hours later, you're still doing attempts of this Elden Ring boss fight. And you're doing another attempt of a boss fight, and midway through the fight, you then pause it and then walk away and do something else. Right? You pause it and go do something else. You will not be able to do something else because your brain will constantly be thinking of, I need to see it through. I need to see it through. I need to get to the end and everything. Because what if after all those hours of attempts, what if I finally, that's the attempt that I can now beat Elden Ring? Right? Now, I've never played Elden Ring that much, so I don't know what the feeling's like, but I know some people really relate to that. Where you play hours and hours and hours of attempts, and You just have to see it through the end. Every attempt can be like, this may be it. This may be the one. Because that's how I feel about FNAF sometimes. Is I'm playing hours of attempts of trying to beat a certain night, and I can't just pause midway through because I'm like, okay, I've done hours of attempts. Maybe this is finally the one where things go right.
Like Hello Neighbor. Well, it comes down to that exact same lore. For one, we have more than enough of it. Frankly, we almost have too much of it. While yes, there is a lack of reliability in all the information we have from these games, all the information we have is piles and stacks and books worth of information. So much so that there's 3 major wikis for the game, several guides that are all either incomplete or slightly incorrect, and a character encyclopedia that has so many characters that they couldn't get half the facts right, but is still somehow missing half of the major characters.
Yep, and a lot of characters they did include are ones that make absolutely no sense. Like, half of the... Like, I want you guys to understand that. The character encyclopedia of, like, 200... I can't remember how many characters it is, so it's 200 something. I think it's 220. But regardless, 200 something. There is, like, 200 something characters in the official character encyclopedia. Just read that title alone. You assume, okay, I'm going to get this character encyclopedia. This is going to show me every single character that is in the story and is important, right? Official character encyclopedia. So every character that's in these pages must be important, must be relevant. When half the characters that are important are not in the books at all, and then half the book is characters from the FNAF AR special delivery game that we don't even consider as canon. Even the game makers themselves have kind of quarantined and pretended that game never existed. So there's so much attention to the FNAF AR game where it's like, this character's from FNAF AR. This game, this character, this character. It's like 100, like a 200 character roster sounds like a lot, and it is. But when 100 of those characters are from a game that people don't even consider can't be canon anymore, and you have several omissions to characters that we know are important, it's like, why? Like, for instance, Michael Afton does not make the cut for the character encyclopedia. Michael flippin' Afton, the son of Michael Afton, the character we play as from minimum FNAF 1 and FNAF 6, who's going location to location to try to undo his father's wrongdoing by killing people, right? He doesn't make the cut for this official character encyclopedia, but Toxic Foxy, Clockwork Ballora, Tree Bonnie, yep, those make the cut. Those characters are important enough to be part of the official character encyclopedia, but the character we play as for 6 games minimum? Nah. Not apparel enough, apparently.
Ugh, I got cat hair in my eye. Even when the real Mark leaves, his shadow remains. But not only that, Five Nights at Freddy's lore mimics real-life mystery.
Mimic! Chat, mimic!
Where we're left to pick up the pieces.
Chat, if you're still here, comment mimic.
In the aftermath. The true crime fandom is something that frankly makes me uncomfortable. Like, these are stories about real people and real tragedies that really happened. Why are we commodifying it? I don't like that. However, I do understand the aspect of enjoying the mystery of it all, because that same quality is what's present throughout all of Five Nights at Freddy's. The story is simple and...
I mean, Five Nights at Freddy's does desensitize you to a lot. Like, let's just be honest. It does. It desensitizes you a lot. Because this is a story where multiple incidents of kids are brutally murdered and lured to a back room by an employee and killed, right? Very brutal, tragic stuff, right? But it's all fun and games. It's all, very memed on with, Five Nights at Freddy's are for the memes and everything. But no, the lore just desensitizes you a lot.
Something we don't have to piece together. which is on purpose, because it's just the sieve that's going to deliver the lore to us. The lore is so sporadic and dripped that we are scrambling for any drops we can find. We have no clue what has actually happened in this background story, but we can hear its echoes. We were never invited to the dinner, but we see the crumbs left on the plate. We didn't see the stampede, but we found the footprints in the snow. Literally, one of the most debated pieces of evidence in this series is 3 pixel art footprints, and we, as the fans of this fandom, have to take these discordant pieces and find connections where there frankly often aren't. The point.
What is the truth of Midnight Motorist? I have my theories, I have my thoughts. I know it's going to sound like a contrarian because I know my thoughts are not the majority. But I feel like yes, if Scott Cawthon had to answer anything to this universe and explain why this exists, it would be Midnight Motorist.
Of Five Nights at Freddy's is its lore and not its individual stories. All the story of the games are side characters trying to survive while the important stuff happens in the background. The point of solving Five Nights at Freddy's lore is like trying to recreate a script for a Broadway show when all you have are the leftover tickets, or dumpster diving at a Michelin star restaurant to try to steal its recipes. We're constantly sifting through the wreckage to look for its blueprints. That's the magnetic draw that FNAF has. It's why this fandom is so voracious for any scrap of information we can find, because we feel like we're constantly so close to that one key piece of information that'll slot in perfectly and explain everything we've been asking about. But
AKA the completionist principle, which is what I said earlier. Of we as humans are so drawn to completing something where if we are given bits and pieces of something, we're like, okay, this gets us started. Now we need to find a way to complete it. So then we can officially put this task to bed. We can say we complete it. We can move on to something else. But the fact that we're constantly hitting roadblocks means we're not quite there. We have not quite solved it yet. And that's what gets more and more frustrating because we invest more and more time because we have to keep trying to invest time into solving it because we've already invested so much into it.
At the same time, there's a fear that a different piece of information can come in like a wrecking ball and change the entire thing. And I don't think I've ever experienced a story where I recognize and admit that one piece of information could change everything I thought I knew about it. And
100%.
It's something that Five Nights at Freddy's has done exceptionally well, because its real story, the lore, is something that's long settled, and we just have to follow the rumor mill to find it.
If we're talking about like one piece of information can change everything, like, you don't have to look that far, but, my mind immediately goes to the original ending of the FNAF lore. If the games did not continue past FNAF 4, that was truly the end of the original story. The 4 games get released, and then the books, and that's it. It's up to us as the fans. Like, okay, you have 4 books, or 4 games, 3 books. Now it's up to you to try to, put the pieces together, right? And that's it. There's no more games. There's no more anything. Now it's all about just filling the gaps. And I bring all that up because at one point, the original ending was Dream Theory. Right. And I feel like that's widely accepted at this point that was the original intent of the story, was Dream Theory. That everything wasn't real. It was all in the mind of the crying child from FNAF 4. And that's what these games are. Right. And there's a ton of evidence to point that. But you get to a problem of Dream Theory where it's like, it's not satisfying. Because this franchise, where once again, we are so craving for any lore, any detail, any Easter egg, like anything that we can get our hands on, we suck on it. Right? I don't know if it's the best way to use, but that's just what came to mind. But no, quite literally, like a vampire. any bit of information, detail that we can get confirmed, we latch onto it and we don't let go. Just it. We don't let go. Right? And that's what keeps us addicted. And one piece of evidence will change all of that. Because, yeah, a fan base that is so addicted like us, if it comes out that this whole lore timeline we've been solving for years comes out, it's like, oh, you know that timeline that you've been trying to solve for years? How, once again, different amount of teeth, different amount of buttons, different amount of toes or fingers, all means something very, very important. For it all to come out and say, yeah, it's all dream theory. It doesn't matter, right? Because none of it actually happened. You're like, I just wasted all this time just for that to be the answer. And you wonder why dream theory has never been confirmed, because that would piss the franchise off. So 100%. One bit of information could change everything. Hell, let us find out that Gregory actually was a robot in Security Breach.
In hell, when I tried to piece together the lore, I literally made a conspiracy board. I know this is a different kind of video than I usually make, but I was thinking about the FNAF lore and I kind of got nostalgic. So I guess take this as a love letter to the series. Now don't forget to get yourself a Mark plushie. It's long awaited. Frankly, y'all wanted plushies of this little cat.
Okay. I think that's the end of it. So yeah. So those are my thoughts on the FNAF lore timeline, why it cannot be solved, right? And as always, this is my point where I'm like, okay, share my closing thoughts, what I think. But like I always say, I gave all my thoughts just in the moment as I was reacting to it. And once again, I do not think it's a problem that the FNAF lore is unsolvable. Because let's face it, that's why the FNAF lore is popular, because of how impossible it is to solve, right? Like, that's just a fact, right? Because I feel like if the FNAF lore came out and said, yep, these are the answers, right? A, B, C, D, just in a bullet point timeline order, Scott Cawthon came out and said, this is the story. This. Just full on timeline. Did not give any advice or did not give any time for any discussion or anything. Just he came out and said, this is the story. This is the story I intended. Here you go, from start to finish. Right? Because every story has to have an end. Right? Would not be a good business move, let's be honest. Because, yeah, it would be the constant talk on the internet. Is like, this was the actual story. This changed everything, because this is something we've always thought was true, but now it comes out that was never true. And these other things that we've never considered are now all of a sudden very important. Right? And then after that, after that week of like thinking about it and processing all this information, you're like, okay, well, now it's time to move on to the next indie horror franchise to try to solve the lore or something else. And you kind of just leave Finance Freddy's in the background because, well, there's no reason to stick around. Like, yeah, I can play the games, but I'm really just playing the games for the games then. I'm not playing it to try to solve the lore and try to find answers because, well, we have all the answers now. The reason why FNAF is popular is because we don't have the answers. And anytime we do have an answer, it is literally like a drug. It's addiction. Right? That just saying as it is, right? Because I'm real. I'm saying as it is. Anytime that we get any answers, any confirmation, anything, it feels like a drug addiction. A drug addiction. Can't talk. It feels like a drug addiction because it happens so rarely. Very rarely does Scott ever come on and say, this is confirmed, this is real, this is timeline, canon, this is how things are. It's always up to interpretation. And that's also one of the reasons why I have started to do these FNAF reaction theory videos and hear people's thoughts on their theories, their reactions, how they process story, how they read the books, and how they are able to piece together like information from the books, games, questions that we've always had for years, and try to piece together into theories. That's why I've kind of started doing these reactions, is to hear people's thoughts on it, because I think it's so interesting hearing people's thoughts and how they interpret the story, because we all will interpret things differently. We all will say this detail is very important. People overemphasize this important detail, and other people are like, pretty much dismiss it. They don't view it as important at all. So it's always interesting to hear different perspectives of this person thinks this is important. That's how they get to this theory. Then other people, they don't think it's important, and this is why. To me, that's why I've started doing these FNAF reactions, because I want to get as many thoughts as possible. And also, it gives me an outlet here to give my thoughts, to give my viewpoints of, stuff I agree with and stuff I disagree with. And just give my overall thoughts of what I think of the theory, whether I agree with it, disagree with it, give my own commentary, give my own thoughts on it, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to solve the lore as much as everyone else, right? So I think that just wraps it up. So let me know your thoughts. If you tend to agree with me, if the FNAF lore being impossible to solve isn't a bad thing. In fact, that's why the series is popular, is because the lore is impossible. So, let me know your thoughts on that. I'll be very curious to know your thoughts.